Random House Audio Voices presents Blood Done Signed My Name. This is Timothy B. Tyson. Daddy and Roger and them shot him a nigger. That's what Robert Teel said to me in my family's driveway in Oxford, North Carolina, on May 12, 1970. We were both 10 years old. I was bouncing a basketball. The night before, a black man had said something at the store to Judy, his 19-year-old sister-in-law, Gerald told me. And his father and two of his brothers had run him out of the store and shot him dead. The man's name was Henry Marrow, I found out later. But his family called him Dickie. He was killed in public as he lay on his back, helpless, begging for his life. I was stunned and bewildered, as if Gerald had informed me that his family had fried up their house cat and eaten it for breakfast. We did not use that word at our house. It was not that I had never heard it or had never used it myself. But somehow the children in my family knew that to utter that word in the presence of my father would be to say goodbye to this earthly life. My daddy was a Methodist minister, an Eleanor Roosevelt liberal, he called himself in later years. And at our house, nigger was not just naughty, like hell or damn. It was evil, like taking the Lord's name in vain, maybe even worse. And now my friend Gerald was using it while talking about his daddy and his brothers killing a man. Before Gerald could say anything more, my mother opened the front door of our house and called me in for supper. I hurried inside, dumbstruck, wondering what the grown-ups in my world were going to say about Gerald's news. I figured that Mom and Daddy would talk to us about what had happened, but instead an eerie hush hung over the supper table. Somewhat oddly, Daddy refrained from his custom of interviewing us one by one about our day. He and Mama exchanged knowing words and weighted glances whose meanings were indecipherable to me. My 12-year-old brother Vern and I talked half-heartedly, but a deep silence had fallen among us. That night, after kneeling beside the bed with my father to say my prayers as we usually did, I lay me down to sleep on the cool, clean sheets, wondering about what had happened and fearing, without really knowing what to fear, the things that might happen now. The attic fan in the top of the house pulled the gauzy white curtains inward on a cooling breeze. 2 weeks into May, it was already hot, and not everyone had air conditioning in those days. From my upstairs window, I could see the blinking red light of Oxford's radio tower. The raspy, playful voice of Julius's jukebox, WOXF's Little Round Brown Mound of Sound, beamed from the transistor radio propped in my windowsill, announcing song dedications. This one goes out from Shirley to SOS, and spinning Otis Redding, James Brown, or Aretha Franklin. Every night that summer, the ominous pulse of Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine pounded on the airwaves, and what may have seemed a haunting anthem of lost love for some listeners sounded a dire warning to me. Sleep was slow to come. While I slumbered, 6 blocks away in downtown Oxford, hundreds of young blacks exploded into rage. At least half a dozen people had witnessed the murder in Graball, the black neighborhood where Mr. Teel's store was located. Word traveled fast. Rumors flew through Oxford that the magistrate, J.C. Wheeler, refused to swear out a warrant against the Teels, and that the police were not planning to arrest anyone. This poured the gasoline of indignation onto the flames of vengefulness. One black witness to the murder told me years later, "When Dickie was first killed, people in Graball was talking about everything white dies." Though neither blood vengeance nor race war ensued, I learned years later that 200 or 300 young African Americans ran through the well-ordered streets of downtown Oxford that night, smashing windows and setting fires. At one point, a group of the rioters ran to the Confederate monument, threw a length of rope around the old rebel's neck, and tried to pull him off his granite pedestal, but the bronze soldier would not budge. The morning after the riot, my sister Boo and I walked past the Teel place on our way to school. There was no sign of Gerald, whom I would not see again for 12 years. Not until the afternoon I went to his father's barber shop to ask his father why he and his sons had killed Henry Marrow. Only a week before Henry Marrow's brains were blown out, National Guard troops fired into a crowd of anti-war protesters at Kent State University in Ohio, killing 4 students and wounding 11. The day after Marrow died, a mentally retarded black teenager was beaten to death in an Augusta, Georgia jail, setting off riots in which white law enforcement officers killed 6 blacks and wounded dozens more. On May 16, 1970, 5 days after the killing in my hometown, Mississippi State troopers fired 350 rounds into a women's dormitory at historically black Jackson State University, killing 2 students and wounding 12. In Vietnam, racial clashes in the U.S. Army made America's misbegotten war almost impossible to pursue. The country seemed to teeter on the brink of apocalypse. So while this is the story of a small boy in a small town one hot southern summer, it is also the story of a nation torn apart by racial, political, social, and cultural clashes so deep that they echo in our lives to this day. The cheerful and cherished lies we tell ourselves about those years, that the black freedom movement was largely a nonviolent call on America's conscience, which America answered, to cite the most glaring fiction, do little to repair the breach. There are many things we never learned about the civil rights struggle, and many other things we've tried hard to forget. My search for the meaning of the Troubles in Oxford launched me toward a life of learning, across lines of color and caste, out of my little boy's vision of my family's well-lighted place in the world, and into the shadows where histories and memories and hopes abide. My family was as Southern as fried okra and sweet tea. Because my father was a Methodist minister, we moved from town to town every few years. But we always stayed in eastern North Carolina, where my father's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather before him had planted tobacco and preached the gospel. We ate collards and cornbread, pork barbecue and banana pudding. We called my sister Martha Bowie Boo, and everybody referred to my Uncle Charles as Bubba, even though his mama had never been in prison and he didn't even drive a truck. If I hadn't learned to read, I might never have found out that damn Yankee was 2 words. But I already knew how to read pretty well by the time the big green and yellow Mayflower moving truck carried our household belongings to Oxford late in the summer of 1966. Oxford was as drenched in Dixie as we were, just about as southern a town as you would ever hope to find. Since Mama and Daddy had not grown up in Oxford but had only just brought us to town, many people seemed to regard us as not from here. That was part of being a Methodist preacher's family in those days, because it was an itinerant system. But Granville County was a harder place to belong than the others we had known. Oxford, my mother remembered, was a sort of a little blue blood town, and it was really hard to get in it. People whose families had been in the county for anything less than several generations remained forever outsiders. The Chamber of Commerce erected a sign at the city limits that read, "Welcome to Granville County, our home, your opportunity," as if to say that outsiders with money to invest were welcome, but that they should understand from the outset that they would never be from here. And then there was the race thing. The color line in Oxford was as bright as blood. Though I had no way to know it at the time, the birth pangs of the black freedom struggle were terrifying whites everywhere. My father tended his flock at Oxford United Methodist Church with passionate attentiveness. He learned the names of his parishioners and their children, polished his sermons into the wee hours, burned up yards of shoe leather visiting the sick and the elderly, and did attend meetings several nights a week. Daddy was always a curious mixture of personal ambition and deep spirituality, though he leaned more and more to the latter. But even though Daddy felt that the Lord had called him to sow the seeds of the Spirit in Oxford, he did not hesitate to acknowledge that it was a tough row to hoe. "This is not an easy church to serve," my father confided to his diary soon after we moved there. "I've visited in the homes and preached, but it's been difficult. There is little spiritual vitality in this church that I can discern. The leadership is staid and conservative. Every minister worthy of the name has to walk the line between prophetic vision and spiritual sustenance, between telling people the comforting things they want to hear and challenging them with the difficult things they need to hear." In Oxford, Daddy began to feel as though all the members wanted him to do was to marry them and bury them and stay away from their souls. The first time Daddy mentioned the race issue in a sermon, one of the church elders accosted him at the door. "I'm accustomed to being served barbecue after a political speech." the man growled, refusing to shake down.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?